Listen, a warm welcome to everyone joining this event, which we've called Nature and the Economy, Who Speaks for the Trees? I'm Caroline Lucas, I'm the MP for Brighton Pavilion, and I'm really thrilled to introduce this event, and especially to be joined by two such brilliant speakers and incredible change makers. So Kate Raworth is an economist and author of the best-selling book, Doughnut Economics. She's co-founder of the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. She teaches at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute. And if anyone saw your amazing speech, Kate, outside the business department last week as part of the XR action, they will know as well that you do a wonderful job at doing a masterclass in economics and being incredibly rousing to many hundreds of people assembled as part of that XR event. Warmly recommend watching that on YouTube. Also joined by Richard Benwell, who is the Chief Executive of Wildlife and Countryside Link, which is England's largest coalition of environment and nature NGOs. Previously, he's been a senior advisor to the Environment Secretary, when he was the Environment Secretary, Michael Gove, and he is a brilliant and very well-known ally to everyone working for a greener future. And between us today, we're going to explore how our obsession with economic growth is destroying nature and what we can do about it. We're also going to celebrate the fact that this year, 2021, is the 50th anniversary of the publication of the Lorax by Dr. Seuss. In fact, this whole meeting is just an excuse to read the Lorax. For anyone not familiar with the story of the Lorax, you'll soon discover why those two things, a debate about the economy and the children's book, The Lorax, go together absolutely perfectly. Because when it comes to tackling the climate and ecological emergency, our destructive and exploitative economic system is far too often the elephant in the room. Greta Thunberg nailed it, as she so often does, when she told the world leaders in 2019, and I quote, "We are in the beginning of mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth." So we need to redesign and repurpose our economy, and we need to do it fast. And we're holding this event right now because it coincides with an official parliamentary petition, which is demanding exactly that repurposing of our economy. The petition was started by a young Brighton resident and activist, Skylar Sharples, and it urges the UK government to shift to a well-being economy, one that puts planetary and human health and well-being before profit and GDP growth. We've got just over 3 weeks to reach 100,000 signatures before the deadline. But if we do, it'll trigger a major parliamentary debate in the run-up to the COP26 climate summit and the autumn spending review, and I can tell you that that would be incredibly impactful. We've just been doing a bit of calculation on the numbers. We've got nearly 50,000 people signed up so far. We need to get 100,000. We had almost 3,000 people registered for this event. So if everyone registered for it, went out then and got just around 17 or 18 more people each to sign the petition, we would be home and dry, we would smash it. So, you know, that bit at the end of a meeting when everyone says, well, what can we do? Well, if you could just go out and get 17 more people, each of you, to sign that petition, that would be a really good start. So please search for the Wellbeing Economy petition, sign it and share it as widely as you can. I'm sure someone in a second will put it in the chat as well. So that's a bit of context for our conversation today. But now we're going to get to the fun bit, because before we have the real debate, we're going to read parts of the Lorax. We're then going to hear from our two fantastic expert speakers. And finally, we're going to leave plenty of time for questions and answers. Please use the chat box for chat. And if you have questions, please type them, not into the chat, but into the Q&A box. And please notice that we're using the upvote function in the Q&A, so we can select the questions that are most popular. So do put your question in there. And if you like the look of someone else's questions, then do upvote them so we've got a better sense of what the priorities are. If you want to share your thoughts on social media, ideally with a nice, helpful link to the petition, please do so and use the hashtags Wellbeing Economy and Doughnut Economics. So now to one of my favorite books ever, The Lorax by Dr. Seuss, also a favorite of my two kids. And as I say, frankly, this whole event is an excuse to read it again. I'm going to start, I'm going to then hand over to Kate, and then Richard will finish up. Okay. So the book begins with a young child in a polluted wasteland who comes across a strange old man called the Onkler, And for the sake of time, we'll start from where the Onkler begins telling the story of what happened to the Lorax. Way back in the days when the grass was still green and the pond was still wet and the clouds were still clean and the song of the swummy swans rang out in space, one morning I came to this glorious place and I first saw the trees, the truffula trees, the bright coloured tufts of the truffula trees, mile after mile in the fresh morning breeze. And under the trees, I saw brown barbaloots frisking about in their barbaloot suits as they played in the shade and ate truffula fruits. From the ripulous pond came the comfortable sound of the humming fish humming while splashing around. But those trees, those truffula trees, all my life I've been searching for trees such as these. The touch of their tufts was much softer than silk, and they had the sweet smell of fresh butterfly milk. I felt a great leaping of joy in my heart. I knew what I'd do. I would unload my cart. In no time at all, I had built a small shop. Then I chopped down a truffula tree with one chop, and with great skillful skill and with great speedy speed, I took the soft tuft and I knitted a thneed. The instant I'd finished, I heard a gazump. I looked, I saw something pop out of the stump of the tree I'd chopped down. It was sort of a man. Describe him? That's hard, I don't know if I can. He was shortish and oldish and brownish and mossy, and he spoke with a voice that was sharpish and bossy. "Mister," he said with a sawdusty sneeze, "I am the Lorax, I speak for the trees. I speak for the trees have no tongues. And I'm asking you, sir, at the top of my lungs," he was very upset as he shouted and puffed, "what's that thing you've made out of my truffula tuft?" "Look, Lorax," I said, "there's no cause for alarm. I chopped just one tree, I'm doing no harm. I'm being quite useful. The thing is a thneed. A thneed's a fine something that all people need. It's a shirt, it's a sock, it's a glove, it's a hat, but it has other uses far beyond that. You can use it for carpets, for pillows, for sheets or curtains, or covers for bicycle seats." The Lorax said, "Sir, you are crazy with greed. There's no one on earth who would buy that fool thneed." But the very next minute, I proved he was wrong, for just at that minute, a chap came along and he thought that the thneed that I'd knitted was great. He happily bought it for $3.98. I laughed at the Lorax. "You poor stupid guy. You never can tell what some people will buy." "I repeat," cried the Lorax, "I speak for the trees." "I'm busy," I told him. "Shut up if you please."
I rushed across the room and in no time at all built a radio phone. I put in a quick call. I called all my brothers and uncles and aunts and I said, "Listen here. Here's a wonderful chance for the whole Onceler family to get mighty rich. Get over here fast. Take the road to North Nitch. Turn left at Weehawk and sharp right at South Stitch." And in no time at all, in the factory I'd built, the whole Onceler family was working full tilt. We were all knitting thneeds, just as busy as bees, to the sound of the chopping of truffula trees. Then, oh, baby, oh, how my business did grow. Now, chopping one tree at a time was too slow. So I quickly invented my super axe hacker, which whacked off 4 truffula trees at one smacker. We were making thneeds 4 times as fast as before, and that Lorax, he didn't show up anymore. But the next week, he knocked on my new office door. He snapped, "I'm the Lorax who speaks for the trees, which you seem to be chopping as fast as you please. But I'm also in charge of the brown barbaloots who played in the shade in their barbaloot suits and happily lived eating truffula fruits. Now, thanks to your hacking my trees to the ground, there's not enough truffula fruit to go round. And my poor barbaloots are all getting the crummies because they have gas and no food in their tummies. They loved living here, but I can't let them stay. They'll have to find food, and I hope that they may. Good luck, boys," he cried, and he sent them away. I, the Onceler, felt sad as I watched them all go, but business is business, and business must grow, regardless of crummies in tummies, you know. I meant no harm. I most truly did not, but I had to grow bigger. So bigger I got. I biggered my factory. I biggered my roads. I biggered my wagons. I biggered the loads of the thneeds I shipped out. I was shipping them forth to the south, to the east, to the west, to the north. I went right on biggering. selling more thneeds, and I biggered my money, which everyone needs. Then again, he came back. I was fixing some pipes when that old nuisance Lorax came back with more gripes. I am the Lorax, he coughed and he whiffed. He sneezed and he snuffled, he snargled, he sniffed. Onceler, he cried with a crofulous croak. Onceler, you're making such smogulous smoke. My poor swummy swans, why, they can't sing a note. No one can sing who has smog in his throat. And so, said the Lorax, please pardon my cough. They cannot live here, so I'm sending them off. Where will they go? I don't hopefully know. They might have to fly for a month or a year to escape from the smog you've smogged up around here. What's more, snapped the Lorax, his dander was up, let me say a few words about gluppity glup. Your machinery chugs on day and night without stop, making gluppity glup and also sloppity slop. And what do you do with this leftover goo? I'll show you, you dirty old onceler man, you. You're glumping the pond where the humming fish hummed. No more can they hum, for their gills are all gummed. So I'm sending them off. Oh, their future is dreary. They'll walk on their fins and get woefully weary, in search of some water that isn't so smeary. I hear things are just as bad up in Lake Erie.
And then I got mad. I got terribly mad. I yelled at the Lorax. Now listen here, Dad. All you do is yap, yap and say bad, 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 bad. Well, I have my rights, sir. And I'm telling you, I intend to go on doing just what I do. And for your information, you Lorax, I'm figuring on biggering and biggering and biggering and biggering, turning more truffula trees into thneeds, which everyone needs. And at that very moment, we heard a loud whack. From outside in the fields came a sickening smack of an axe on a tree. Then we heard the tree fall, the very last truffula tree of them all. No more trees, no more thneeds, no more work to be done. So in no time, my uncles and aunts, everyone, all waved me goodbye. They jumped into my cars and drove away under the smoke-smuggered stars. Now all that was left neath the bad-smelling sky was my big empty factory, the Lorax and I. The Lorax said nothing, just gave me a glance, just gave me a very sad backward glance as he lifted himself by the seat of his pants. And I'll never forget the grim look on his face when he hoisted himself and took leave of this place through a hole in the smog without leaving a trace. And all that the Lorax left here in this mess was a small pile of rocks with one word, unless. Whatever that meant, well, I just couldn't guess. But that was long, long ago. But each day since that day, I've sat here and worried away through the years while my buildings have fallen apart. I've worried about it with all of my heart. But now, says the Onceler, now that you're here, the word of the Lorax seems perfectly clear. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. So, catch, calls the Onceler. He lets something fall. It's a truffula seed. It's the last one of all. You're in charge of the last of the truffula seeds, and truffula trees are what everyone needs. Plant a new truffula, treat it with care, give it clean water and feed it fresh air. Grow a forest, protect it from axes that hack. Then the Lorax and all of his friends may come back. The end.
Thank you so much. I think you two, if you ever need another profession, then definitely storytelling is high up there. Thanks so much for that. And so now we just have a bit of a reflection, I guess, on the Lorax and why it's still so relevant today. And I was going to kick off with Kate and ask you, Kate, what you think the Lorax teaches us about how we run our economy. What does the economy have to do with saving nature and restoring biodiversity. And I was just reflecting as well that given that even a children's book written 50 years ago could set out with such clarity how our economic system is destroying nature, why is it you think that our politicians struggle with it so much?
Wow. So I find this book absolutely astounding. I'm 50 years old, so this book is the same age as me. I was the generation of children. The little character, the little child here, right? Actually, Caroline, I kind of think that's you. I mean, you were 9 or 10 when this was published. I mean, right? So what I find astounding is what I find really hurts my heart about this book is that it was written not for today's children. And we can't just read it to our children and say, there we are, that's for you. It was written to us. It was written to our generation, who are now the politicians and the lawyers and the business leaders. We are the children in that book who he was speaking to. I really feel that. And also the thing that amazes me about this book is in so many parts of life, scientists come up with a scientific breakthrough or an analysis, a really important analysis. People say, oh, we need to write a children's version of that so the kids can understand it. This is the other way around. This came out before the IPCC existed. This came out, I mean, what came before it? Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. But this came out before the UN Convention on Climate Change. It came out before any global science studies. It's like the kid's story came first. And he was so spot on. And the scientists have ever since documented in article after article and study after study what he has in brilliant technicolor here. He was so spot on. So why it's so relevant to the economy is, of course, the Onceler. He embodies, almost like he embodies kind of Gordon Gekko from Wall Street, right? He embodies the ultra capitalist who sees only resources, sees the ability to twist consumers into buying anything that can just be continually reinvented. So he's like the advertising industry. Keep reinventing your needs. You can never have enough. You'll always need another one. And brings in all his relatives to use everything up without realizing he's literally cutting it all down. And I think his name, the Onceler, is because like you can do this once. That's what I don't know. I so wish Dr. Seuss were alive. You can do this once. You can chop those trees and use those truffles in the way that you're doing this. You can only do it once, and then that thwack of the last tree and it's gone. But all the gluppity-glup, I mean, that's what I studied as an economics student. You know, when we studied, there wasn't even an option to study environmental economics in the 1990s. You studied, well, imagine there was a factory and they were putting out some kind of chemicals. It's like, it was Dr. Seuss. We were studying this. And then you say, what would you do about that? But we never studied the whole system. And this book says, look what happens if you start with economy first. That when the Onceler turns up and he sets up a shop, right? Market first. Let's just start selling. And if we only then recognize the interdependence of the living world as a consequence, look at what a devastating that consequence is. And there's the Lorax continually pointing out eloquently from the beginning how everything depends upon everything so powerfully. So it really, really moves me. Why have we not taken heed of this? Because what the Onceler says is still taught, I think, in economics courses and in so many business courses around the world. Business is business and we've got to grow. And isn't that what success always looks like? And he goes from kind of, you know, the economy has to grow and I need more money. It spans from the very personal greed to this is how the system works. And that system still sits in the heart of so much economic thinking and so much economic justification that we haven't actually replaced it with something that belongs in this world, where the truffula trees aren't cut down, they are harvested at a sustainable rate. So that, of course, you want to use that amazing truffula, what is it, the tufts. You want to use those tufts, but at a sustainable rate. Let's use the fruit and eat the fruit with the other living beings at a sustainable rate. We've not yet put in place Herman Daly's vision of an ecological economics that starts by saying, what are the life support systems of this world and how can we be part of it? So we've carried the Onceler forward, and we've just literally watched Dr. Seuss's prediction come horribly true in so many dimensions.
Brilliant, thank you. And yeah, the way in which economics gets taught, I guess, is answerable for a lot of the problems that then happen down the line. Richard, can I put the same kind of question to you, and maybe with a particular spin on on all of the conversations that you have with politicians in your role as CEO of an environmental NGO that spends an awful lot of time talking to a lot of politicians for whom growth is still, you know, that ideological thing that they find very hard to let go of.
It is, and I feel for a lot of the politicians because they know a lot of these things. Many of them will have grown up with the Lorax themselves and understood that there are limits on growth. We all have a sense, don't we, that too much of a good thing sometimes turns bad. To take another children's metaphor, it's like when the little boy at bedtime demands an extra gulp of Calpol because something good has seemed like it was along the right lines. They want one more, and they want one more, and they want one more. And understanding and imposing those limits on ourselves is a difficult thing. And for politicians, of course, there are benefits for apparent benefits, short-term benefits from the people who are closest to them, from increasing economic activity. We've got locked into a cycle where the creation of jobs and the fighting the spectre of employment is all about keeping on growing. And the folk who are there to speak for the agenda are the ones who have the most immediate problems on their hands. And the important thing about the Lorax, I guess, is that, you know, he's fictional. Who speaks for the trees in the real world? Well, they're not around. And it's up to us to be that voice for future generations who can't speak with the immediacy of the constituents on the doorstep saying, I want my job now. It's up to us to speak for the disenfranchised and the powerless across the world, who are the other people on whom we're foisting the harm of overexploitation of nature. We are always inclined to cater towards the proximate and the present over the distant and the future. And so it's our job as storytellers and advocates to try to fill that void. And I guess if there's one thing to remember when we speak to politicians about these things, it's that there's no easy way to lift one economic system and shift in another. The petition that we're asking everybody to sign today, which I hope everybody is frantically doing as they listen, suggests rightly that we shift to a well-being economy, and we've got to do that. But it does oversimplify, doesn't it? Because we can't just take a sort of capitalist growth economy out of one box and shift in a well-being economy. There are 1,000 different laws and cultural norms and ways of thinking that have embedded this way of approaching our lives. And that's why we've got to help politicians with the day-to-day decisions, look at where we're assuming that growth is the right answer, the way we plan, the way we grow, the way we abstract water, the way we heat our homes. All of those things need to change to fix the model. It's not an easy one. And that's why I have sympathy with the politicians, but we do need to keep reading it to make those day-to-day decisions change.
Thanks, Richard, and thanks for moving us on to thinking about that transition, because you're right, and you are right. In terms of the petition, what we're asking for, in a sense, is to have different measurements of what we want the economy to do. I mean, at the minute, we've designed an economy to deliver growth, and by and large, it does it pretty well, except when there's COVID or a recession. But by and large, that's what everything is geared up to do. And if we could change the overall objectives that we want to see coming out of that economy, and we changed it to, you know, providing enough for everybody and living within the means of a one life-giving planet, then we would have a better chance, I guess, of shifting onto that other kind of paradigm. And I wanted to come back to Kate, and maybe to ask you, Kate, how the work on Doughnut Economics and the Action Lab in particular, how does that help us with this transition that Richard is talking about? Because it is a fair point. You can't just cut and paste a whole new economic system onto the one that we've got. So could you say a little bit about Doughnut Economics and about the transition?
Yeah, and in the world of systems transformation and the brilliant systems thinker Donella Meadows, she always said, you know, the most powerful change to the most powerful way to change a system is change its goal, or even change the paradigm of which it's a part. And that sounds like a long-term impossible job, but actually in an individual, it can happen in a blink of an eye. And that's what I've really learned actually with the donut diagram, which I first drew back in 2012, so almost a decade ago. And it looks like this. right? And the goal is leave nobody in the hole in the middle of the donut, leave no one falling short on the essentials of life. These are from the Sustainable Development Goals. They're agreed by the world's governments that every person has a claim to these essentials of food, healthcare, education, housing, water, community, political voice, income. Leave no one in the hole, but don't overshoot this outer limit. These are the planetary boundaries, the life supporting systems of planet Earth. And that's what the Lorax speaks so brilliantly for. He speaks about protecting, preventing chemical pollution and preventing air pollution and biodiversity loss and land degradation. He speaks to that long before the scientists even came up with this context. So the donut is not about endless growth. It's about thriving in dynamic balance. And the shape of progress is more like this. When I do it with my hands, like leave no one falling short, don't overshoot the limits. And it's, oh, that looks familiar. That looks like a heartbeat. It's a deeply human, natural, living dynamic, actually. And we know it in our own bodies of health, of not too little, but not too much, that balance. If we can take what we know from human health to planetary health, we give ourselves a great big metaphorical advantage of a start. So the donut's been around for over a decade. We know we're in massive overshoot. All that red globally shows us that we're in overshoot. But ever since it was first published, people started saying, okay, that's the global picture. What about here? We want to do it here. We want to bring this alive in our town, in our community, in our neighborhood, in our country, in our island nation, in our city. And so we set up Doughnut Economics Action Lab for anybody who wants to use these tools. We've put them in the commons. We believe the commons are a crucial space of the 21st century, enabling anyone to pick them up and put them into practice where they are. So it's been thrilling seeing cities like Amsterdam and Copenhagen and Nanaimo in Canada say, we're adopting this. Barbados, Curacao in the Caribbean, saying we're going to put this into practice. In the UK, Leeds, Devon, a wonderful initiative in Devon, Cornwall County Council have adopted it, and they've adapted it slightly to say every infrastructural decision that we now considering must go through our decision-making wheel, which looks very like the donut. Are we, with this new plan, whether it's a cycle lane or a new development, are we helping get people out of the hole in the middle? Are we making sure we're not overshooting the planet? And this is, to me, really powerful because it's a very practical way of taking a vision of thriving in balance, people and planet, what it can actually look like as a decision-making tool. And it does, and it works, and they're inventing it for themselves. Now, this is beginning to pick up and take off worldwide. At Doughnut Economics Action Lab, we just go where the energy is. So we work with those change makers who are already in action because they inspire others so much. And today's actually my first day back at work, and I'm just so excited to get back to it because there's so much happening and so many places that are leading and showing this is how we can do it. By the way, there's a lot of traction in Wales, and Wales has a well-being economy and a future generations commission, and they're on the case about reimagining this. By the way, there's traction in Scotland. It's growing there, and they have the strong well-being economy and alliance. So it's actually England, I think, that we need to bring along and have the UK as a whole, and of course Northern Ireland, take the whole of the UK in the places where Wales and Scotland are already leading, not just here, but internationally. People are looking to Wales and Scotland and New Zealand saying, there's another path that we can take where we actually put well-being at the center of our vision. And it doesn't, GDP growing does not always match with improving our well-being. We know that. So we are one of the richest countries in the world. We now can switch from saying, let's just bigger and bigger and bigger, to say, let's make sure everyone lives well and we restore and regenerate this living planet so that we're not onceless, we become regenerators and we can continue to live well.
Brilliant. And I love that framing about living well, because every time you ask people what they actually want from life, once basic needs are met, then what people tend to talk about is their love of nature, or they're wanting to spend time with their family, or about relationships, meaningful work and so forth. It's not about stuff at the end of the day. And so it just feels like there is a massive opportunity really to speak to that. I was going to come to Richard and ask something about, a lot of the work that you do and that we've worked on together in Parliament, and you work with all MPs, is very subject specific. We're talking about laws on pollution here, or we're talking about legislation on timber over here, and less so on the actual systems change that in a way Kate's been talking about. And I wonder if you see a tension between the kind of single issue environmental campaigns and the overall need to change the system, or whether you think there's a way of bringing those two things together so that in the individual campaigns we are also making the link to the system too.
Yeah, I think we have to use the particular to illustrate the general, and use those examples of environmental destruction or outrageous overexploitation to make the case for general change. And I absolutely agree that getting the targets right is fundamental. So, as you know, at the moment we're fighting to try and get legally binding targets for nature to do for the natural environment what the Climate Change Act has done for carbon. And those signals at the top of the economy become guiding principles, don't they? Net zero has started to break through to become a guiding principle for the way that we manage the things we produce, the things we consume, the things that we trade, in a way that's about more than simply creating wealth. It's started to break through, but just one isn't enough. You know, climate change is a single symptom of the kind of systemic environmental breakdown that's coming fast down the track, of which coronavirus is a symptom, of which the fires in the Amazon are a symptom, of which the flooding that we're experiencing at the moment is a symptom. So we use each of those examples to try and make the case for major change. But I would say that getting the signals right at the top isn't all. You know, this has been ingrained for so long that we need to recognize where it's become normalized. We've spoken before, Caroline, about the Infrastructure Act that has a legal duty to maximize oil and gas revenues, about the Deregulation Act that has a legal duty on regulators to promote economic growth, about the Regulators Code, which organizes how our public bodies act. The first paragraph says we need to promote economic growth. And all what we need, as much as a change in that headline, is a change in the details of our statute book. And we sort of let the government off by talking about a well-being economy. What we need is a well-being government that's willing to put each and to translate those new goals down that they're starting to recognize and give lip service to, and translate those down to the everyday functions that will make businesses report properly, that will structure markets to deliver betterment, not bigament. That's
nice. That's a good line. I like that. Betterment, not bigament. And I missed the opportunity just to flag, in case people don't know, that as Kate said, in Wales, they are doing some amazing things. And we've certainly been learning from the work that Jane Davidson did on the Future Generations Act there. And so there is an initiative. I was trying to push it through the Commons last year. I'm handing it over to someone else this year, but Lord Bird, who was the founder of the Big Issue, is pushing it in the Lords as well. And there is the idea of having this Future Generations Commission here in England as well, because we are lagging behind. And it is exciting that we don't actually have to look that far afield. I mean, I know I love looking at what's happening in places like New Zealand, but when it's so inspiring, you can just look, you know, a couple of 100 miles away or less to what's happening in Wales. That's really exciting too, and we need to kind of build on that. Keeping with Richard just for a second, I was just going to come to one thing, which a lot of the debate right now, either on the climate debate or nature, is about putting a price on carbon, a price on nature. And I wondered whether you think that is part of the solution, or whether it's dangerous. I mean, I'm pretty sure you're not going to say it's the total solution. Some people do say that. But do you think the risk of commodifying trees, let's say, is a bigger risk than actually the fact that if you did put a price on a tree, you might just recognize some kind of value to it? So to what extent is that whole issue around pricing nature a helpful but insufficient step forward? And to what extent do you think it's actually quite dangerous in terms of the mindset that it might encourage?
It all depends how it's done. You know, I really believe in the polluter pays principle as a way to structure markets to help internalize some of those environmental costs that have so often been treated as if they're free. So finally making sure that we make the polluter account for the costs of the harm they do would be a tremendous help. And I think it's so hard for consumers, for the individual, that we've got an economy that's dying to change. You know, you see the growth of social enterprises and things that are breaking their way out of the shackles of the old way of doing things, but we need to help people to do that. And I think pricing has a really important role to play in trying to make sure that the environmental choice is the affordable choice. And, you know, it's wrong that the producer of an organic food has to pay to certify that the food they've produced isn't covered in world-destroying, potentially health-harming chemicals, and it ends up with a higher price on the shelf compared with the, you know, I don't want to label a particular product. Let's call it Kentucky fried turkey or something, where it's really cheap and harmful. So pricing has a really big role to play. Of course, that's different from creating a system where you simply commodify nature and you allow harm to be traded away. There is a role for market mechanisms, but it has to be structured really well. Markets are neither good or bad. It's all about the rules that we put around them. And it's up to us whether we do it in such a way as to guide that invisible hand of the market towards good or towards further harm.
Kate, any reflections on that same point on the market and on pricing?
Yeah, it's just such a fascinating debate. And I always think of it as a spectrum of positions. And I'll sometimes say to people, tell me how you talk about the environment, and I'll tell you what your job is. So if someone says, oh, well, I talk about natural capital and ecosystem services, I say, I'm going to bet your job is you're immediately facing politicians, you're lobbying government, you're lobbying to protect that wood, to ban that chemical pesticide. And so you're speaking the language of power. And you're putting a price on the value of pollinators or of that natural woodland, because you're trying to insert the value that you hold into the mainstream discourse, which is pounds, dollars. If somebody says, I never talk about natural capital or ecosystem service valuation, I talk about the living world, I'll say, okay, you're not face to face with politicians. You're taking the long view and you're working on Doughnut Meadows transform the paradigm, and you're trying to educate a whole new generation of people to see that we are part of and dependent upon the intricately balanced systems of the living world. Now, what can happen, and you just alluded it to it, Caroline, is these people may have the same goal, but they can end up in tension because these seem to be, and they can be, strategies that really conflict with one another. And I've seen a lot of people, you know, critiquing each other for those different positions. So I think it's really important for us to recognize that they may be holding a different position in a debate. What's crucial, though, is that when people use monetary valuation, the danger there to me, and I agree with Richard that, you know, you need to, gosh, polluters should pay, and it should not cost more money to be doing the ecologically right thing. But the danger of pricing things, as I'm sure Richard agrees, is that we then are putting the living world into the language and therefore into the hands of the economists who say, thank you very much for your valuations. You can now leave. You don't need to protest outside. You don't need to tell, because you've given us all the information in dollars and pounds. So we'll do the calculations, and we decided, actually, sorry, it's better to build a hotel here than protect that land. So there's a danger that we flatten it and give it away. And I just think that this is actually the century of metrics, of data. And so at the time when you had Simon Kuznets back in the 1930s, who was asked to create GDP as a metric, and so put everything into one metric and it's measured in pounds or dollars. If he were alive today and he'd say, wait, what? You have all these data. This didn't exist when I was like, you can measure in real time the carbon concentration in the atmosphere. You can measure the pollution in the river. You can measure the integrity or the dissolution of biodiversity of an ecosystem. You have these data. Well, you don't need to do what I did. You don't need to flatten everything into one number. I was playing with almost no information. You've got a world of information. Create a dashboard. Right? When we drive a car or fly a plane, you wouldn't accept someone saying, here, there's just one dial. I've made it really easy. And everything's been compiled into this one dial of speed and temperature and petrol. And no, you want a dashboard and of our own bodies. I'd never go to the doctor and say, just give me one number, doctor. How am I doing? I don't want that one number. I want to know, you know, my range, because I know I'm a complex living system and I need to look after all my systems. And that's what exactly the Doughnut aims to do. It is a dashboard, and you know, there's the global dashboard, and it's thrilling for us at Deal to see places and cities and towns say, great, we're going to take that and we're going to make it our own. City of Amsterdam adopted the Doughnut in April 2020. This September, they themselves are holding themselves to account. They're holding Doughnut days and saying, how are we doing? Are we going to measure are we improving or not against these metrics? So they're beginning to make that real.
Fantastic. I love the idea of the pilot and the docs. Just the one metric. All I need to know, how am I doing? I mean, I would love us to be having this debate in Parliament, and that kind of takes me back really to the petition just before I open up to the floor, because the whole point, just to remind people of this this wellbeing economy petition, is that if we get the 100,000 signatures, then that would trigger this kind of debate, I hope, on the floor of Parliament. When you get 10,000 signatures, we've got about 48, I think, at the moment. When you've got 10,000, then that does trigger the government making some kind of response to the petition. And they have provided a fairly lengthy response, but to me at least, it seems to fall miserably short to grasp either the social or the environmental urgency of shifting away from GDP. It waffles on about a review that took place 6 years ago. It completely fails to commit to any kind of serious changes to the economic orthodoxy. And to the extent that you may or may not have had time, Richard and Kate, to have a quick look at the government's response, I just wondered if you had any immediate reflections on that. I'll go to Richard first.
You're right, Carolyn. They say the right words, and let's give credit where it's due. You know, that at last the Treasury is starting to say that it recognises that there are limits on the biosphere and that we can't have an endless growth and we need to live within our means. That's good. But if we really meant it, wouldn't we have been talking about a different style of recovery from this terrible COVID crisis? Wouldn't we have been, instead of investing £640 million in nature and £640 billion in traditional infrastructure, wouldn't we have been doing it the other way round? Wouldn't we have recognised that actually, in a crisis that's cost the world trillions of dollars, if you want to use that money, the main solace that for a lot of people has been access to our natural world, and realised that it's the fact that we've abused that's caused this problem in the first place, and therefore invested not in getting people back into the shops to buy more fast fashion, to buy more intensively reared products. You know, we would be investing instead in a recovery that's based on investment in, I'm going to do the politician language, Kate, invest in natural infrastructure, because that does job creation, that does asset enhancement and demand creation in a way that would substitute stuff that takes more from our planet for a way that gives more to our planet. So there are those immediate questions in front of us where if the Treasury had been serious about its response, you would have seen the reaction. And there are more ahead. There are more for you guys in Parliament to make a difference. So think of the planning bill. At the moment, the planning system is about extracting more, building more, creating more value for housing companies. It should be about planning for the natural environment. Think of things like the reforms to the way we abstract water and deal with water pollution. Again, we've got to think about how we enhance those natural assets that support 10% of our priority species, instead of thinking about how we make it okay for people to continue to pour pollution into our rivers. Those are the things that, alongside a set of dashboard of metrics and new goals, that would really be the test of whether we're taking this seriously. And so far, the evidence is it's the change down the back of the settee for nature, while pouring money back into the traditional concrete economy to grow out in the old-fashioned way.
Thank you. Kate, I know you've only just got back from holiday today, so I don't suppose you have been sat there reading the government's response to our petition, but I don't know if you have any reflections on what you've heard.
So Richard made some great points, so I'm just going to add a different dimension, which is about the timing, right? This is a really, really important window of months in the UK, and here's why. First of all, surveys found that climate change, and so environmental care, is a higher concern in people's minds than in the last 30 years in the UK. It's a high leverage moment for resident and citizen care in the UK about these issues. It's also a really high leverage moment for the UK to take action, because the UK government decided to ask to be the host of COP26, the 26th meeting of the world's governments negotiating on climate change. It's happening in Glasgow in November. we've asked to host this. So when you're the host, you have to lead. And if you don't lead, there ain't no chance that the world's going to show ambition, right? The host has to show that leadership. Now, so in this run up, this is a critical time for the UK to actually step up and show leadership. And that's why Extinction Rebellion, for example, are calling for an end to any new fossil fuel investments. It is an utter no-brainer. And it's outrageous that the government used the excuse of saying we've got to maximize revenue potential from fossil fuels. It's so outdated. This is a crucial time to bring the question of a well-being economy to the agenda, to actually, and the climate and ecological bill, right? The ecological emergency bill. We've got to bring these issues to the fore, because this is a window when it matters. The world's eyes are on the UK at this moment. And so this is a really important leverage moment to bring these debates into Parliament and to show that we are indeed going to provide that leadership.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Okay, so now we've got the problem of 110 questions and about 20 minutes to try and answer them in. So I will look at what's been upvoted, because that seems to be quite a fair way of doing it. And actually the one that has the most support at the moment is very literally about trees, since that's where we started off with the truffula trees and the Lorax. Giovanni Iozzi says there seems to be such an emphasis on planting new trees from government and developers, rather than a stronger emphasis on retaining our mature trees that sequester so much more carbon and provide biodiversity habitats for thousands of creatures. Saplings won't survive the hotter summers unless they're carefully tended. Is the idea of planting new trees just greenwash? Kate, do you want to do that one first?
I'll jump in and say what I see in this space, which is, again, there's the danger of, yes, there is a real danger. It's like, oh, what we need to do is plant trees because it's countable. You can declare it in Parliament. We've planted 5,000, 10,000, whatever trees. And there is a danger of, but will the maintenance and will the care be provided to enable those trees to grow? I know in the world of rewilding, and I hope there's many rewilding fans and supporters and activists here, the world of rewilding says, just stand back. If we just stand back, nature will plant her own trees. There's seeds just flying in the air. She'll plant there the trees that actually want to belong there and actually that are part of what's already there. So it's do less and get out of nature's way and let her rewild. And by the way, she won't just plant trees, which we're obsessed with. She'll plant shrubs. She'll bring back grasses. She'll bring back the ecosystem that will make that land make sense. Now, having said that, I also recognize that many cities need more trees. We need to defend ourselves against the urban heat island effect. We need to bring back tree canopy in spaces where they've been removed. So yes, of course, trees are required, but there's a real danger that we're obsessed with planting trees rather than recognizing that there are so many more nature-based solutions and ways of doing this itself.
Thank you. Richard?
We need oodles more trees, absolutely oodles more trees. They need to be broadleaf native trees, and we need to let some of them naturally regenerate, and we need to go out and plant loads of them. And that means we're going to have to make sure that we get our hands on lots more land and we empower lots more communities to do that. Of course, protecting the few fragments of remaining natural habitat should be the first port of call. And on your question about pricing, Caroline, the other thing that governments can do is just ban stuff and make laws, and clarifying once and for all that we should not be destroying the last remnants of important habitats would be a huge step forward. And if you care about money, the amount of money that we waste through legal action challenging developers who still go for chancy bids to build on our finest nature sites, SSSIs, SACs and SPAs, it's in the millions and billions. We should just say once and for all, hands off. And the other thing, very quickly, of course, is it's not just about trees, and you can't make an ecosystem out of trees. So please, let's make sure that we remember there are ancient wetlands too, there are ancient grasslands, and there are novel wetlands and grasslands and meadows and all those things that need creation. So let's not just plant a few trees, let's restore ecosystems.
Absolutely. Maybe I could just give a shout out as well for a book that I'm reading just now that you may know, called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I just love it, and she's got a whole book about moss, and she's got thank you, Kate. You're always good with the with the handy what do you call them? Props. Yeah, exactly. It's a fantastic book on exactly that. Richard, you were just talking about planning, and the next two questions are about that, which I'll roll together. And I'm going to start kind of directing these questions to each of you rather than letting you both speak because we won't have time. So this is from both Sue Roberts, and then there's one from Fiona McIntosh. They're driving at the same thing. Sue says, how do we end the juggernaut of unneeded housing supported by all political parties? We're concreting over land that can then never be used for regenerative farming or wilding. And Fiona says, it seems to me that big developers are untouchable. Our planning system weighted towards them rather than communities. They're continuing to build unsustainable, not-for-purpose executive homes on all of our green spaces, no space for nature, tying people into cars, and so on and so forth. We've got the planning bill going through Parliament. I wonder, Richard, if you had any reflections on how much we can use that as a vehicle to try to change direction, because as it stands right now, it's going to exacerbate half of this rather than healing it, not least by giving more and more powers to government and not to local communities or even local government.
Exactly. The planning white paper was really outrageous. It promised to zone up the country into growth areas, renewal areas, and protection areas. The growth and renewal areas basically took the gloves off development, giving permission in principle for large swathes of land, taking away local control, taking away that granularity of nature that you need to take into account to get things right. And in the protected areas, there was no new protection conferred whatsoever. It was simply continuing on the current case-by-case basis with no added protection for nature. So those were terrible proposals. I think the government is listening, and that the reaction and backlash that's come from people all around the country has given us a window to make it something better. So what should we do with the planning bill? If I had my hands on it, I'd try and repurpose the planning system so it's back to targets and objectives. At the moment, it's all about £250,000 houses, 300,000 houses a year. The planning system is not just about houses. It's also about planning how we balance space for nature with space for people, with space for agriculture. So repurposing the planning system to do all those things, really important. Let's have a national spatial plan to help us to do it in a sensible way based on that massive rich data source that we now have. And the third thing that I'd add in there, if I had my way, would be a set of new standards for access to natural green space, recognizing the amazing value that's completely unrecognized in GDP that we've all taken from access to nature over the last couple of years. So though the planning bill can be changed, there's a window of opportunity. It's about setting those goals. It's about making sure that local authorities are empowered to have a say. And it's about actually gathering more of that data in an integrated online platform that can help to sort of level off the asymmetry of power between the developer and the local authority that's there at the moment. So that was a brilliant question. If you get the overall aim right, it will filter through to these particular sectors to help us to repurpose and repower what really matters to people.
And it does seem to me that there are some real opportunities there, because conservative backbenchers actually do really care about this stuff too. They're getting lobbied really heavily by it, by people concerned about it. So there is just the possibility, I think, of some kind of coalition between, you know, very annoyed backbenchers from the Conservatives and the opposition parties coming together to really put some pressure on government. So that's definitely worth fighting for, I think. The next question is for Kate, specifically from Rachel Collinson, saying, would you say it's better for us to push for our economy to shrink, in other words, degrowth, or to say that economic growth is irrelevant and what matters most is the growth of well-being? So where do we put our focus?
Great question. So, and I avoid the word degrowth because I think people use it in different ways and then the conversation can very, very quickly get confused. So I'm going to hold up the donut. This is the global donut. But if I was showing us the UK donut, we'd see, it wouldn't be this extreme and inside, but we'd see people deprived, falling short on the essentials. And we would see that the UK was actually very significantly an overshoot on multiple planetary boundaries. Now, what's crucial? What should we be emphasizing? We should be emphasizing that we want to live in a nation that meets the essential needs of everybody. So gets everybody out the hole and comes back within the planetary boundaries. So we want to shrink our impact on the planet through shrinking our carbon footprint, shrinking our material footprint, shrinking our use globally through global supply chains of water and land and fertilizers. That means changing our diets. It means changing the way we shop and reusing and repurposing things. It means using a shared car scheme if you can, rather than owning a car, all these kinds of things. So yes, we want to shrink our impact. Now, the knotty question is, what does that mean for the future of GDP? And I know very, very few people who actively, directly advocate make GDP itself go down, because in of itself, that's not going to achieve anything particular that we want. It's probably going to result in a recession. People lose jobs, and actually the worst off people are worse hit by that. So no one I know is saying, yeah, I just want GDP to go down. People want us to come back within planetary boundaries. Now, the question there is, can you do that while having an economy that still pursues an ever-growing GDP? I personally have not seen any evidence. No country's ever done that yet, especially on a material footprint. I've not seen any evidence it's possible. And the worry is that when we have economies that still think, yeah, but we can always grow, we'll reduce our footprint, we'll just have a dematerialized economy. There's no evidence that that's coming through. So for me, it's really important, as I set out in Doughnut Economics, what we need to do is create an economy that's not dependent upon endless growth. I know that sounds a bit more of a mouthful, and it's not a really clean, straightforward answer, but it's a very complex area. And so I think we need to take the growth dependency out of our economy. For example, I'll give just one example. At the moment, if the economy doesn't keep growing and businesses are still becoming more productive, i.e. they're always focusing on how can we employ fewer people to make the same amount of stuff. And that means if the economy doesn't keep growing, there will be unemployment. And every government is rightly very afraid of creating an unemployment line. And so one of the motivations for governments to keep the economy growing is to keep employing all these people who are being kind of cut out of production chains. We need to transform our vision of work. Economist John Maynard Keynes thought by now we would not know what to do with our leisure time. We'd only be working maybe 15 hours a week. How wrong he was, because we're trapped in the consumer culture of needing a need. So we need to rethink our relationship to work. Can we share work? Can we have part-time work? How do we take the pressure off the economy to grow endlessly? It's really complex. And I want to just end by saying I profoundly believe this is a very, very important economic question. I do not know the answers, and I think we don't have the answers yet. We're seeing experiments pop up, but if we don't ask the questions, we won't even begin trying to figure out the answers.
Thank you, brilliant. I've got two related questions sort of for Richard. First is from Anne Farnbacher, who says, are there any efforts in the UK, like in some other countries, to make nature a legal person, which would massively impact on legislation, protection and enforcement? And kind of related to that, I think, is from Mike Dixon saying, should promoting traditional GDP growth and consumerism become an eco-crime? I'm thinking more, I guess, about the debate about ecocide and the work of Polly Higgins, but maybe you could take those, Richard, to the extent that they're both about legal efforts to try to build this into legislation.
They're both exciting and important innovations. I don't think we're close on the question of a legal character for nature in the UK. But it's not the only way to do these things, and there's an EU movement growing for a sort of set of environmental rights akin to what we have in terms of human rights, which doesn't sound as far away. And there's a Scottish centre of environmental law that's looking at those kinds of legal rights in the UK. So I think it's not beyond the bounds of possibility, but there is still a lot that we can do with the law as it is in the UK, and we're not doing as much as we should be. So the government got away scot-free really when it missed a whole load of nature targets last time. At the international level, we sort of miss nature targets with impunity. Last year, the UN confirmed that we'd missed pretty much all of our HE targets, which are the international biodiversity targets. So even if we can't sort of invest a tree with legal character to go to court, we can make sure that citizens, NGOs and watchdog bodies are empowered to actually speak for those trees in a way that actually works. And there's a critical debate in Parliament at the moment about the Office for Environmental Protection, this new watchdog that's supposed to be replacing the EU Commission and courts, which let's face it, have been one of the most powerful environmental watchdogs the world has ever seen, with their daily fines for non-compliance in the member state level. And that watchdog at the moment is utterly fettered. So there is actually a legal restriction on the remedies that a court can grant if the government breaks the law. That means it can't do disproportionate harm to third parties. All it can really do is declare what the law should be. So in the dying days of the Environment Bill, there's still a lot of campaigning that you guys can do to make sure that that watchdog is able to help us hold the government to account when it breaks environmental law, and to give access to environmental justice that's free and affordable for citizens and effective when it hits the courts. It would be cool to have trees with legal character, but for now, let's just make sure that the things that are immediately in front of us are ones that are genuine, powerful tools to force the government to be held to account when it does break the law.
Yeah, thank you. And I really agree with you about the importance of getting that OEP, Office of Environmental Protection, right. And again, maybe there is some scope. I know the Lords have been doing a lot better on it than the Commons, but you know, the government said so many times that when we left the EU that we would have the same standards, that there would be no reduction in protections and enforcement and so on and so forth. They are on the record so many times saying that, and yet it's really clear, as you say, that this regulator is going to have nothing like the powers that the Commission or the Court of Justice had. So maybe there is a bit of a wedge there that we can try to work on more. A quick one for Kate about unions, actually. It's Frank Friedman saying how to get buy-in from the unions and pointing out that if they used it, they would have enormous power. But he goes on that depends on their members believing in the possibility and practicality of a just transition. And I would just be really interested to know in your work with the Doughnut Labs and so forth, do you have much direct links with unions around that?
Great question. And because center to the Doughnut is income and work, and workers' voice, political voice, right? So, and social equity. I mean, it has very strong resonance with union values. And the power of unions to shape business, I think, I'm just going to say, I think it's really important to think about the design of business itself when we compare the UK, where unions are often very marginalized from actual core decision-making in businesses, to say a country like Germany, where unions have representation on corporate boards. And so the role of unions can be really important in reshaping the future of businesses and whether those businesses become regenerative and become distributive. So very, very important future role for union representation. And we know massively weakened in this country over the last 40 years. We haven't spoken much with unions in the UK, actually, and that's a really interesting future possibility. And that would probably happen more through some of the initiatives that are happening. So Doughnut Economics Action Lab, we respond to where people say, we want to put this idea into practice. But we've certainly worked with unions in other countries, for example, in Denmark, where the city of Copenhagen is really doing a deep economic investigation of whether or not they want to adopt the Doughnut as a model for the city. We were then invited by the union, one of the unions there, to give a presentation to their members, because of course they're thinking, what does this mean for us? And how do we relate to this, and how do we see our values here, and how could this be a useful tool? So I think it's a really interesting future possibility if there is indeed that interest.
And following on from that in a way, because you mentioned the role of unions on boards and so forth, Mark George says business is business and business must grow. How do we convince everyone that economically the Doughnut makes sense and growth is not the only aim? And I was going to ask you about the role of business. And again, I guess, Kate, the same question: to what extent do you feel that businesses are themselves engaged in trying to get their heads around this stuff? Yeah, so the journey with business and the conversations with business have been amazing, fascinating to me. So the Doughnut was published nearly a decade ago. And again, since the beginning, companies have been interested. Companies of all sizes. And I've had so many conversations with businesses of different sizes, from 3-person social enterprise startups to literally Fortune 500 companies, the big brand names that we can all name. And I've just been so fascinated by the very different responses of business to the Doughnut. So I always start by showing this. And some businesses will say, oh, that's a shame. It's a shame that the business of business is business, literally, right? And other companies will say,
That's amazing. That could almost be like our logo of why we exist. We created an enterprise to clean up this community, to create jobs here, to recycle the waste that's being used, to provide sanitation in this neighborhood. We exist. We're just using business as a vehicle because it's the most effective form, but we exist to solve for this. So you get these completely different responses. And to me, it's really important whenever we talk with businesses, they want to show us our products. Oh, you know, look at our phone. Yes, we've got this phone. We're making it from recycled plastic now, and we're paying good wages. And they want to talk about the product. Fine, we can talk about the product. What I really want to talk about is the design of your business itself. And I'm just going to do this. This is such an important point. You say you like my props. Here's my favorite prop. Always bring this up for any conversation with a company. Okay, business, dear Wanslaw, we could have had a conversation. What is your purpose? Right? Why do you even exist in the world as a business? How are you networked with your customers, with your suppliers, with your ecosystem of industry relations that you depend upon? Are you bringing your values and purpose to them, or are you getting, you know, are you actually demanding lower prices, faster turnaround? You're knocking down those values. How are you governed? What are your metrics and your rules and practices? What are the metrics of success? What would a success for your business look like? And how are middle managers incentivized? But let's go down to the really deep stuff. How is your business owned? Because whether it's owned by its employees, by its founding entrepreneur, by a family, by shareholders, by venture capital, by the state, these are all concurrent business models. They're all out there, these forms of ownership. They have huge implications for what sits at the bottom. And it is, of course, finance and how that business is financed and where that money is coming from and what it expects and demands. Is it here investing in you because it wants short and fast, high financial returns, and if you don't deliver them month on month, we'll just sell our shares like that, we're out? Or is it here because it believes in your purpose and is actually investing for the long term? So to me, these are the classic design traits from brilliant analyst called Marjorie Kelly that I bring to every company and every student I teach in business schools. I say, be a detective about businesses for the company you work for, that you're thinking of joining or leaving, or that you're buying your groceries from. If you understand how that business is designed, that is going to determine whether or not they can be part of becoming a regenerative economy and a distributive one, or whether they're stuck saying the purpose of business is business and we're just here to drive out value for our shareholders. So it's a crucial conversation, and one that actually we're just about to bring on board a business lead at Doughnut Economics Action Lab. We've held this box quite tightly shut because there's a real danger for us of getting greenwashed by businesses. And we're about to open that and expand our work with companies and invite them to this space and say, right, are you going to transform and structurally design yourselves to be part of the future, or are you going to be left in the last century?
Fantastic. I look forward to hearing how that goes. That's great. Listen, we've only got 6 minutes left. And there's one glorious question here, which kind of challenges, in a sense, the whole premise of, of using the Lorax, but I think in a really helpful way. So anonymous attendee at 1716 says, I love this story, but is the Lorax a useful parable right now? He acts alone. He takes the moral high ground without willing to compromise. He speaks on behalf of others who are able to speak for themselves. He doesn't build a community of change makers. We need the Lorax and all of his friends to be the ones agitating for change. I just love that as a challenge. I was going to come to Richard. How would you answer that?
I mean, hey, it's a very good point, and I think it's right that the Lorax, he's a bit grumpy, isn't he, as well, and he's a bit sort of condemnatory in his way of doing things, and perhaps I don't want to sound like an apologist for anything that's bad. You know, we absolutely agree that we need to change fundamentally the way we approach our economy and reshape things. But how did we get there? Well, I don't think there was any sort of malevolent mastermind that came up with the way that we do things now. The guy at the start of the story, you know, he quite likes the trees when he first appears, and some of the kitty designs quite cool. The first thing my son said when I read the Lorax to him was, "Cars, Daddy, cars." He was quite excited to see the innovation and the technology, and you know that there's a lot. There's an exercise of empathy to be done when we try to suggest this system change. That actually we're not dealing with a mustachioed villain here. We're dealing with a juggernaut that's hard to turn around, that's based on a lot of centuries of cultural development. And actually, it's amazing that we've opened our eyes to the fact that there's something different that can be done. And we need brave leaders to put the legal fetters on the system that will help us to change. So yes, we need an army of Loraxes. We need them to speak with the conviction of the trees for the trees, but in a way that understands how we've got here and comes up with practical solutions that are about more than just turning back the clock. And maybe the sort of note of hope that the Lorax ends on with that seed is the idea that we can that we can do that by working together and creating a future that's not just about halting change, but is one that's about community and health and well-being and all those better things to come.
Thank you, Richard. Kate, can I just throw that last one to you as well?
Yeah, great challenge. So I'm gonna give back. So I think the story is not about the Lorax. The Lorax is the way in which we wake up. So some people get that recognition and wake up and hear. Some people hear the Lorax's message through science, and they're moved and struck and shook by seeing the intensification of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, or the data on and those satellite images of the Amazon just being decimated, or the percentage of pollinator decline since 1970. Some people hear that as the Lorax. Some people feel it when they walk in the woods and they see the loss of wildlife that they remember was there as kids. Or as I took my kids snorkeling in Lyme Regis this weekend, and my daughter was so excited to see a fish swimming on English seaweed. And I was thinking, wow, you know, it's so depleted, but she was so excited. And we feel that. So I think the Lorax actually gives us that connection with the rest of the living world and helps us realize that we are delicately interconnected with everything. So I don't think the story is about the Lorax. I think it's about this guy or gal, right? This is the character that the stories, and Richard ended up saying this too. This is the person the stories are really about. And this person, we won't make the change unless a whole load of us show up. It's not one kid, it's all of us. Unless we get together, unless we find each other and mobilize, unless we actually make sure we take the seed from the onceler. So one of the really interesting things is the onceler, he knows the answers, right? Let's just read it again. He says, he chucks it out the window. Here we are. And he says, it's a truffula seed. It's the last one of all. You're in charge. And truffula trees are what everyone needs. Plant a new truffula, treat it with care, give it clean water and feed it fresh air, grow a forest, protect it from axes that hack. He knows exactly what to do, but I think he didn't trust himself. You see, I think the onceler actually knew that he wasn't the right person for the job, because his desire to bigger and bigger and bigger might, in a kind of Jekyll and Hyde personality, he said, I just need to hand it over to you. So we all need to catch this seed. Whoop, there it is. And the beauty is there are seeds everywhere. There are seeds in every neighborhood, at the school gates. There are seeds of community. There are seeds of regeneration in each of our own back gardens. There are seeds of transformation possible in every business. So each one of us becomes that kid who can put up our hand and say, what is our company doing about sustainability? What is our school doing about it? I'm going to connect with my MP. Oh, I'm going to become an MP. Thank you, Caroline Lucas. I'm going to be a change maker in all the ways that I can be a change maker, of all the spheres of influence that I have. And we all have many. A 17-year-old schoolgirl can speak to 17-year-old schoolgirls in no way that adults can get anywhere close, and a 70-year-old man can chat to his friends in the pub in no way that other people can get close. We are all powerful change makers, so we all can catch those seeds. To me, that's the point. And unless we get together and rise up, we won't make that change happen.
Wow, thank you both so much. We are out of time, but that was an absolutely brilliant discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for all your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't ask them all, but I'm just scrolling through the chat. There are hundreds and hundreds of comments in the chat, which we're going to try and save, because I don't think anyone's been able to keep up with them because there have been so many, but real engagement in the chat as well. So thank you to everybody who joined us in that way. I just have to say then a few really big thank yous. So thank you to everybody who's been here. Thank you to Kate and Richard for your amazing contributions. Thank you to the Brighton resident and activist Skylar Sharples, who started the Wellbeing Economy petition. Just to let you know, we've got another event linked to the petition on Tuesday next week called Women in the Wellbeing Economy, with another stunning lineup of speakers, and it will explore what a gender equal economy with wellbeing at its core would actually look like, and why it's important for women to take the lead in that transformation. So please do join us there as well. Until then, please check out the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. Please buy, beg or borrow Kate's book. Sign up for Wildlife and Countryside Link updates, and of course, sign and share the petition for a wellbeing economy. So just to remind you again, if the number of people who registered just contacted 17 people and got them to sign, we would have a debate, maybe like this very debate, on the floor of the House of Commons. We can always hope. So big thanks again to everybody. It's been a great discussion. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much.